The whole point of dissociation is you're not conscious of what's going on, and so it's like my ego is making me not conscious of being not conscious, and that's and when I actually understand that, that's an extremely terrifying thing, because it's like, what else is my ego not making me conscious about,
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. I'm Josh Levine, your host. Today, my guest is Xander. Xander is a software engineer who lives in the United States. He works at a gaming company. And he is a social self-pres 9-wing-1 953 trifix. Xander is so brilliant, and he made a name for himself in the Enneagrammer community a couple years ago with his original insight regarding attachment to disconnect, which was his term for trying to make sense of what's going on with attachment types 3, 9, and 6, where what he identified was that it's not that they're actually securely attaching. What they're doing is creating the conditions in which they're constantly reaching to be attached, but not actually attaching. He talks about it a little bit towards the end of the interview, but this interview is really more about the man, Xander. And if you want to learn more about attachment to disconnect, then I recommend you check out the Big Hormone Enneagram episode where he is a guest on it, talking about it with Courtney also. So let's talk about this interview. This conversation was amazing. We talk about what it's like for Xander to be a 9 and why he's a 9 and not a 5, like he mistyped for a couple years, for many years. So we talk about what it's like to be a 9 with a 5 fix, and we talk a little bit about 6 fix versus 5 fix, especially contrasting my 6 fix versus his 5 fix. And we have a really good couple of meta-conversational moments where we actually explore the dynamic in real time. Pretty interesting. One other thing is that Xander is and has been on his own journey of inner work and personal growth for a long time, and he has worked with modalities like internal family systems and plant medicine. And man, towards the end of the interview, the story he gives about what he experienced on one plant medicine journey is absolutely beautiful and remarkable and really worth listening to. And so I just really respect Xander. I think he's super intelligent and very deep, and I'm really looking forward to you learning from my friend Xander. So without further ado, here he is. Welcome everyone to another interview. I am here with my friend Xander. And let me just set this up. So your full typing is social self-pres 9-wing-1 953 trifix. And So first of all, hello and welcome. And I'd love to start where I start with everyone, which is, can you talk about your Enneagram origin story?
Yeah, I was being trained to lead a team of interns in this art company in Morocco. Like, we were there, and our goal was just to connect artists, local artists and international artists, with schools, so they would come over and teach classes and stuff like that. And I was leading this team, and so I was part of the process of being taught to lead was the Enneagram. It's like, oh, there's this tool that you can use to like get to know your team better and get your teammates to know each other better. And so that's when I first learned about it. I was like, okay, cool, this is a cool tool. And then
how long ago was that?
That was, oh gosh, 2012.
Okay.
So 11 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, after that whole experience, I was like, okay, this is pretty interesting. So then I started like looking it up online and like doing my own research, and like it's like, oh, okay, so there's like this whole community. There's like a more occult and mystical background to this system. It's not just a team building thing or whatever. And that's when I was like, okay, this is actually pretty interesting. As started reading books and stuff like that about it. So yeah, started reading on online forums, and getting through that whole like online typing thing with like Myers-Briggs, cognitive function, sociology, all the whole gamut. I was included in all that too. So, and Enneagram was one of them.
Got it.
But yeah, I guess that was like 11 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a lot of interesting things on the menu here for this conversation. We we talked about. So first of all, you gained some notoriety in the Enneagrammer Facebook group with your very interesting insight about attachment to disconnect, which I'd love to unpack in a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
and then you were on some of the BHE podcasts talking about that, and some of that also in conjunction with Courtney, who's also object relations queen. And you are also an immigrant, and we were going to potentially get into that from an attachment point of view.
Yeah.
And um, I feel like let's start there. I would love to just hear your kind of life story as a nine, to the extent like the headlines of it or whatever feels interesting, juicy for you from the point of view of being a nine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just just we can talk about the immigrant experience, I guess, and then see what attachment threads or nine threads we can get from that. It's probably a
Sure.
better way to go.
Okay.
So yeah, I grew up in Singapore. So I was born in the Philippines, and when I was like one, my parents migrated to Singapore because my dad got a job there, and it was just like better opportunities because Singapore is a you know better to do country than the Philippines was and is. Um, and so it's interesting that I grew up as an immigrant, and my parents also were immigrants. Um, and I mean, it's a common experience for immigrants, but I was like an immigrant along with my parents. So um, I guess in terms of attachment, like whenever I had to like learn how to do anything, um, like they were also learning how to do stuff at the same time, kind of, right?
Mhm.
And so I had to learn how to do a lot of things by myself. I had to like learn how to be my own person in Singapore. Um, be, I had to learn how to be a foreign person in Singapore um, by myself. Um, because I mean, there weren't at that time there weren't a lot of Filipinos there either. So like we didn't have any community, um, and my parents were figuring out how to survive and live in another country while like raising a kid. So yeah, yeah,
Wow. That's interesting. And also just your phrasing of that was interesting from the five fix point of view to like having to figure it all out by yourself. Um, so you're basically were an immigrant twice. You moved from the Philippines to Singapore,
yeah.
grew up in Singapore until you were 16, and then
Mm-hmm.
from there you moved to America
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
were an immigrant again, and so had to adapt yourself to a new culture. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and this is something that I've been working with consciously for the past like year or so. Like that's my default state is an immigrant, is like
Uh-huh.
adaptation, right? Is
Yeah.
like everywhere I go, I always have to adapt. Like because like that's from day one of my life. That's just been what I've had to do to survive in the world. So
Hmm.
like I can't not do it. Um and I feel like I've never been in a place, I've never lived in a place where people are the same as me. And that's like my perspective, right? Whether or not it's true, whether or not it's reality, like that's a whole other conversation. But like my
Hmm.
perspective is that I've never ever lived in a place where like people are the same as me. Um, in Singapore, like there were no other Filipinos. In the U.S., like I'm living in a place now where there's like no really other Asian Americans. I don't have many Asian American friends.
You live in
So
Oregon, right? Eugene, Oregon.
I
Yeah.
live in Oregon, Eugene, Oregon.
Mhm.
And I feel like part of that is me like continuing that pattern. like like I could move to a city, a more metropolitan area that has more of that community because I've been realizing that some of this stuff, some of my trauma from being an immigrant or has to be worked out in community. Like part of it is like realizing that I can be a part of something, you know.
Mhm.
Um but just like innately because this is the pattern that I've always grown up with. It's the only thing I've ever known. Like I just, my ego just naturally pushes against it, or it's not even pushes against it. It's just like it just doesn't even register that that's a thing that I should be seeking or should be trying to work towards, you know.
Community or belonging?
Community and belonging. Yep. Yep. And you know, at one level, right, race is just one level, right?
Mhm.
Because there's many other levels of belonging. But for me personally, I feel like it's an important lesson that I need to learn to work through some of the woundings that I've had in that realm because it is of that level. So,
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
You know, it's interesting as we framed up this conversation from the point of view of you being an immigrant. It strikes me that the the metaphor or the archetype of immigrant uh, is really relevant to attachment, just at like a basic um, metaphor level, in the sense that you are adapting to a culture, and there's some journey of discovering who you are in relation to your surrounding, um, and a sense of kind of like coming out as yourself in a certain sense.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and it is interesting that you are actually an immigrant, in the sort of legal
right,
sense and geographic sense.
right,
But it's just that's a kind of interesting metaphor to draw in general for attachment.
yeah,
Um, so I have so period paragraph 2 is I would love to know when you started learning the Enneagram, what is it about it that captured you, and what have you what did it throw into relief, or what did it clarify about yourself for you? And I know it's been 11 years of a journey of working with it, learning about it. But like, what was the initial hook, and where are you at with it now?
yeah. I mean, the initial hook, um, was just a system where I could understand people, um, and like it articulated patterns into these concrete, not measurable, but like observable things that I could see and like help me understand basically what's going on in the world, what's going on with myself. Like you know, give some words like what's going on with myself and other people in relation to other people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I typed as a 5 for a really long time.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and where I am with it right now, I think I mentioned it to you earlier, is for me personally, is learning how to talk about the Enneagram without talking about the Enneagram or without
Mm.
explicitly talking about the Enneagram. And that's just like in daily life of like, okay, there's this particular language, there's this particular niche language that is prevalent in like only Enneagram communities. And, you know, the people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis are not in these communities. Um, and it's learning how to integrate in like this kind of thinking process and like patterning with the people around me without like using jargon or specialized language, um, and uh, and it in a way that still like gets deep and gets and cuts to patterns and traumas. You know, so that's where I'm at with it now. Yeah,
What's your motivation for wanting to talk about the Enneagram without actually talking about the Enneagram?
it's just getting to know people on a day-to-day basis, and like getting to like articulating their pain. Um, and because that for me makes more interesting conversation. Because I mean, I don't know, I could be with a coworker at lunch and just like talking about stuff, and then you know we slowly get to some interesting topic and like the Enneagram. I was like, oh, so that's in my brain. I'm like, oh, so that could be like this kind of pattern or six pattern or you know whatever all that language. But then what how I have to translate it is like, oh, it is it because of X, Y, Z, and then can go somewhere really interesting, you know, with that conversation. So yeah,
Where I'm coming from with that question was, it strikes me as a kind of attachment pattern itself, in a sense, to be trying to draw a bridge between your inner world and someone else's inner world. And
Sure.
in the sense of like, you know, not expecting that someone else is going to be interested in or in developing the vocabulary and learning the framework of the Enneagram, kind of getting all the way into like this mental model that you know, and instead taking this mental model that you know and kind of um, making it uh, digestible in other language to a person that you'd like to connect with.
I mean, I don't know if it's like sharing my inner world with their inner world. Um, like I am not an Ennea-vangelist. Like I don't care if other people get into the Enneagram or not. That's not, yeah, not at all. Um, because it's a system, and if people get into it, great. It's been useful for me. Um, so it's not really something that I care to share with the world.
Yeah,
It's just a method for me to get somewhere interesting with people. Yeah.
there's something about that that just is like really striking to me. Like, yeah, what's going on with that? Like, so it's here's why that's interesting to me, because you clearly think about the Enneagram a lot, and you not just think about the Enneagram a lot, but have read a lot of books and have come up with your own original insights that have sparked the imaginations of a community that is like pretty diehard Enneagram. And to take the position that you're not an Ennea-vangelist, sincerely, as I experience you doing right now, is pretty amazing to me, because it's kind of like sort of, I don't know how to put it. Feels almost like, I mean, there's your double withdrawn stem right there, like 9-5, or I don't even know how to categorize that in the frame of the Enneagram. It feels like there's some interesting paradox happening in you between the attachment desire for belonging and the 5 rejection, or like kind of hanging out in your own castled inner mental world with your frameworks that you don't really care if anybody else is on the same page, but it's how you make sense of the world.
Right. Exactly. Well. So you said attachment, desire for belonging. That's is that partially part of your new object relations thing?
Actually, no, I hadn't even formulated like that. I just kind of, it just
Okay.
came out of my mouth. Do you not experience it
Okay.
that way?
No, because I've seen that language before in some other literature, whereas like, um, yeah, frustration, rejection, and um, belonging, or
Oh, that's
like,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
one
yeah. I
object, the second object,
think
and then
that's Belinda
there's a
Gore's
third object.
formulation. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Right. And I thought that, I was like, no, not at all. I don't think attachment is about belonging at all. Maybe like I could
Uh,
see that being like perhaps a social thing. In that sense, I could see that makes sense. But like to
mm,
me, it's about like existing in the world. I call like the existential object is what attachment types are like, or not attachment types, withdrawn types are like the 459, right? Um,
mhm.
um, experience with. It's something about existence. The four, only exists in and of themselves because there was nothing in the world that like, or they were frustrated with the modes of existence that were present in the world, right? Like
Mhm.
for five, like anything in the world, like they reject all forms of existence in the world. And then for the nine, they're trying to seek some kind of existence in the world. So I mean, that's just my kind of little formulation of like, because
Mhm.
yeah, I don't relate to the nurturing, protective, both kind of paradigm that like doesn't really make sense to me in terms of like in relation to like all the other types of like, oh, these types deal with both. No, like that doesn't make sense to me in terms of a model. Um, there has to be like a third thing that could or could not be related to nurturing or protective. Could or could not be related to mother figure, father figure. Same with nurturing and protective, right? But there is this like existential thing that me personally I relate to being an immigrant, right? Like um, maybe maybe that's like social existence, right? Okay, you're dropped here on this in this body on this earth, and the way people perceive you and the way that you are told that you are is that you don't really exist in the same way that other people do. And that hits different for me than belonging, right? Maybe belonging could be a part of it, right? I'm not like totally dismissing belonging as being part of it, but
Mhm.
like for me, it's like a matter of existence. Like you exist at a different level than other people.
There is a lot to unpack in the word existence
Yeah.
there.
Fair.
But actually, what I want to draw out of what you just said is I feel like when I speak to you, I feel your five fix on display really strongly in the sense of you really are not absorbing the orientations of other people. You're sort of like it's like even the way that I just used the word belonging, it kind of landed at your doorstep and you chose not to let it in, or and it's like actually here's how I see it.
Mm,
Um and I find that interesting for as a we're our trifix is close. I have a six fix, you have a
mhm.
five fix. And my my reflex is to kind of accidentally let in someone else's orientation and then discover later that, oh, actually I think this other thing.
Mm.
um but that was a really interesting demonstration that you just gave of the opposite pattern for you of it kind of
Right. Yeah.
you might let it in eventually, but you gotta like justify it to yourself first. um yeah.
Yeah, and that's like, gotten me in trouble before in
Okay.
terms of just like conversing with people in general. And also, I had like a short career in academia for a while where like I was pursuing a PhD and like writing dissertations and like not dissertation, but working on a dissertation and like yeah, there was a lot of friction between me and my advisor because of this exact problem of like
Hmm.
I I thought that in academia I could be in an ivory tower and just like pursue my own interests and ideas and like really cool stuff. But like no, that's not the case. Academia is like a conversation between scholars. And in order to participate in academia, you have to understand and know and converse with other scholars and like take in their perspectives. Not take in, but just like engage, converse, and like. And I always like was naturally pushing back against that. Um, like I, in a way, like I don't care. I like don't care like about what's going on. Like I care about this. Like
Yeah.
let me do this. And but that's the reality of things. That's not academia. And it's two different worlds. And in this way, like I I don't see a lot of fives in academia.
I
Fives
see a
are
lot
like
more sixes. Yeah, it's a six world in my
yeah,
view. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Fives are like in some like cave somewhere, like I don't know, doing their own thing, which is interesting from a standpoint of like say like Zizek, right? I mean, he's an academic, but the way he does it is very very interesting. So he's an interesting case study for me. Um,
Who's that?
but yeah, Slavoj Zizek is a philosopher that I'm pretty sure is a five. He's like
Okay.
anyway yeah. So yeah, I know what you're saying, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is okay. This is really interesting because from the point of view of trifix, um, or the way that I'm conceiving of trifix, and part of my theory here is that what five is doing is rejecting on the level of orientation, and it's everything that I just explained before. You said everything you said, but
Okay.
you have nine and three that are attaching on the level of nine, attaching on the level of sensation, like wanting to be held by the environment, and then three attaching on the level of other people's gaze upon them or their regard of them. And so, if you might be interesting to tinker with that because it's like maybe the question really I'm leaning to is why are you a nine and not a five?
Yeah. Because I think at a and yeah, I've talked with a lot of people about this, right? Because I typed as a five for a long time.
Mhm.
Um, so this is where my kind of understanding of Enneagram has to come in. theory.
Mm-hmm.
In that, so attachment types are nines, right? For nines, the identification is with the moving center, right? But the other two centers, the feeling and thinking centers, are entangled. And there's like a similar pattern, right, with 3 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, inside the type structure of a 9, like this type structure, there are two bodies that are kind of orbiting each other. Like the identification with the moving center and then the entangled other two centers. And because identification is with the one center, these two things kind of have equal weight. And so they're orbiting each other. And so like with attachment types, there, we've heard like there's always like these two modes of functioning. With 3s, you either feel or function. You can't do both at the same time. Like you feel or function.
Yeah.
With 6s, you like you think or like you live.
Mm-hmm.
With 9s, I mean, I don't have like pretty words for 9, but like you like are in the world, or you are in the world, or you are in yourself.
You exist, or you are swirling, or something.
I exist in the world, or I exist inside myself.
Okay.
Like, yeah. Okay. So that's 9. With 5, right, it's the same pattern as 9 in terms of the thinking center is entangled with the feeling center, and then but the identification is with the thinking center, so the moving center is like completely ignored. And what I've found with 5s is that I don't have that ignoring the moving center aspect to myself. Like I'm like still seeking some kind of existence in the world, whereas I don't think, from the type structure perspective, I don't think 5s do that. Yeah. And so in terms of me determining why I'm a 9 and not a 5 is that like that I do feel these two different modes in me of like existing in the world and existing in myself. Whereas 5 is they're just existing in themselves. They're like rejecting the world. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's how I'm kind of seeing me as a 9 in terms of my experience. Like I still am relating with people. I still am talking with people. I am expressing interest and sensation in terms of like using your language. Yeah.
So let's lean into my 6 fix and go into your mental world for a second. So can we talk about how are you using the word existence? And I'm just going to be careful to restrain ourselves in some kind of way, because that could go everywhere. Yeah. But like in terms of being a 9, like do you struggle with the sense of your existence? Is that a thing that you feel sort of like toggled on or off in the way that you're describing? And what is it like when it's on? What's it like when it's off?
Yeah. I think when I'm like in a room of people, I am like observing. And when I'm observing what's going on, like nothing's going on inside me. So that's like be like, that's to me that is the mode of like the moving center. On the flip side, like when I'm asked the question or something, sometimes I have to like, I have to go inside and like think, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the other side of the 9 equation. So the other mode, where I don't feel like I'm even in the room.
Yeah. And so the way that I'm tracking that, and this is my language and how I relate to it, but like your psychological location, there's a very clear distinction between when it's outside you, like for example, if you're listening to me talk and your attention is over here, and when it's inside you, when you're searching for what meaning is inside you to articulate.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that tracks. And do you have a sense of, so do you have siblings?
Yep, I have a younger brother, 6 years younger, so kind of a large age gap as well. Yeah.
I guess I asked that question because I'm curious about how you show up in relationships, whether it's friendships or romantic partnerships or whatever, and the experience of being fully there in the relationship, like existing in the relationship versus not existing, and how you've experienced that. Maybe is there a journey that you've gone over in your life around that topic?
Yeah, I mean, dissociation, right, is the word that comes up in
Yeah.
terms of relationships or just in things in general. When things get difficult, I just check out, and that's really something I've been like really consciously working with the past couple of years, particularly with psychedelics, and really
Mm-hmm.
having that altered state able to become conscious of dissociation, because the whole point of dissociation is you're not conscious of what's going on, and so it's
Yes.
like my ego is making me not conscious of being not conscious, and that's and when I actually understand that, that's an extremely terrifying thing, because it's like, what else is my ego not making me conscious about, you know um and where that's gotten me now is that, like, I I can be in conversations with people, and I can notice when things start to get muffled, like literally physically muffled, like voices start to get muffled, like I
Sure.
can't understand what someone is saying anymore.
Yeah. That's so
um
funny. I have a secondary nine fix, and I relate to that. I was just thinking about that last night, actually. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so I was like, oh, like I'm dissociating right now. and then like and then on a good day, like being able to like trace back, okay, where did this start, at what point did this start, what emotional response was triggered when this started me into dissociation, and then being able to remain in that emotional state instead of being triggered into dissociation. And that emotional state is many times anxiety. Like, I don't let myself be anxious. Like, my body's just like, nope, oh, anxiety, nope, just dissociate immediately. And for me right now, it's learning to remain in anxiety. Learning to remain in the, what is that, the sympathetic realm, instead of just redlining into the whatever. um
The dorsal realm or whatever. Are you referring
yeah,
to
whatever, like the
yeah.
one where you're like playing dead.
You talking about vagal theory? Yeah, polyvagal theory or something like that.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
yeah, so like it's learning how to like remain in like my stressed state, instead of shutting down. And that for me is like engaging in relationship, and part of it, sometimes it comes out in anger, sometimes it's like letting myself be stressed and overwhelmed, like, oh wow,
Mhm.
I'm really overwhelmed right now, I don't know what to do, and like saying that to another person. And like, that's like huge for me.
Yeah.
um yeah.
What kind of things are overwhelming?
Social situations are very overwhelming for me. um
Like what about them?
just
Or you go ahead.
just feeling like, I can't enter, participate in something, and then I'm kind of just standing in, like, it's like I want to either be participating or like not there, right? And it's worse when the worst part is when I'm in the middle, like I'm there but I'm not participating. and 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 the pattern is that, okay, I'm in this place, and and I and when I dissociate, I'm like, okay, like whatever, like I'm just standing here, and this is just a pattern for me, right? From my childhood of like, not like being told I exist at a different level than other people. So like, this is natural. This is what it's supposed to be. And that, that's like a dissociative state at that point. Instead of like sitting in that anxiety of like, oh wait, what am I supposed to be doing? What are other people doing? Um, let me ask for help. Maybe, that's the huge thing. That's part. Let me ask for help, or let me express myself, even though it's uncomfortable for other people. um,
Uh-huh.
because that's going to be more anxiety inducing, right? Um, so instead, I just like check out because that's
Yeah.
more natural, more comfortable.
This is a
Yeah.
this is a pretty leading question, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. Like,
Okay.
how do you experience taking on the discomfort of other people, or do you experience that, or like the preemptive, the not wanting to make other people uncomfortable is like a classic 9-fix thing, right? And
Yeah.
it's especially core 9. So like, yeah, what is that for you?
Well, I mean, in terms of the inner work that I've done, I've been like traced back to my relationship with my mom, and how, I mean, yeah, just feel, recognizing that I was actually like the emotional caretaker of the household,
Okay.
um, because my parents were immigrants trying to figure out how to help us survive in this new country, right? They had stuff going on, so like the best way, like the best thing I could do since I was a baby was like be okay, you know, like not need a lot, right? Because they had so much shit going on. Like the best thing I could do, or maybe a better way to put it is, the most positive feedback I received was from being okay,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and so and so and looking back, I do experience this more with my mom than my dad. So always having to be okay with my mom, and like having to kind of take on her emotional burden, um, so that
Mm-hmm.
we could survive as a family. Yeah.
When you say yeah, that
Hmm.
phrase right there, take on her emotional burden. I mean, it's a really classic attachment statement.
Right. Right.
Taking it,
Right.
and can you talk about like when you take on, whether it's your mom or a relationship partner or someone else's emotional burden,
Hmm.
like what's actually happening there, or like how are you holding their emotional state in you, or allowing, like, being the padded room for them to just have it, or are you absorbing it into yourself and then at some point you realize, oh, I've taken on this thing that's not actually mine?
Right. Right. It's like kind of like, they're carrying some heavy luggage, and I'm like helping them carry it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and right. And we as human beings only have so much emotional capacity, right? Or
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
emotional capacity and availability. Um, and then me not realizing that I have a limit to my emotional capacity, and because being open to carry things is just my natural state. And so
Mm-hmm.
then when I reach my capacity and I break down, I either dissociate or I explode.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and kind of these two patterns have been like the protectors that I've been working with, just to use IFS language. I don't know if
Uh-huh.
you're familiar with.
Yeah. IFS
Yeah.
is great. Yeah.
Yeah. So just those two patterns are like the protectors that I've been working with to like um, that I've been trying to protect this child self of mine that's wanting to be themselves in the world. Yeah.
So that's good. Yeah. And for people who don't know what IFS is, it's referring to internal family systems, which is a whole system of therapy where you identify the parts of you that are often kind of entangled or at war with each other and trying to protect other parts of you. And usually there's an inner child at the bottom of the whole thing. And it's a really brilliant and amazing framework to work with yourself. Really amazing.
Yeah.
So is that something that you work
100%.
with? Like, is that a consistent practice for you, or do you work with someone on that?
Yeah. It's a very consistent practice for me, especially when delving into psychedelics. It's a
Ah,
framework
that's good.
that,
Yeah.
that's a framework that like puts structure to the often nebulous psychedelic experience, that makes it more helpful. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. In
Yeah.
addition to just being free, like mind freeing and and yeah, yeah,
Let's talk about psychedelics.
yeah. Let's do it. Yeah,
What have they done for you, and yeah,
yeah.
start there.
Well, I mean, I think the very immediate thing they do for me is just like I feel like my mind is very rigid. Or at least I found that out. My mind is very rigid, um, in, in terms of me holding on to my mind, but also for everyone, just the patterns that are um, used in the neural pathways and stuff like that. You use them over and over again, and they just get really, um, yeah, you know what I mean. Um, and so psychedelics have helped me, learn to let go, but then also have kind of helped me reset those neural pathways so that I can form new neural pathways, or I can let go of old neural pathways that are that aren't helpful anymore. So yeah,
Mhm.
immediately that's kind of what's come to mind. Yeah.
I want to zoom out for 1 second and just like, so what I'm tracking here is that I do actually experience you as a core 9, and like just your energetic quality has that settling 9, like we've landed here together kind of thing. And I also experience your, like, this interesting paradox you hold inside, which is the 9 absorptive, taking on other people's emotional burden kind of thing, at odds with your intellectual independence. And that sounds like a really interesting thing to be working with internally. And is that let's see. I guess
It
what I
doesn't feel
was,
paradoxical to me, is if that's what you're getting at,
yeah. So, well,
why
yeah.
is that a paradox to you?
Because, yeah, let's see. Because it's being absorptive on one level of existence and profoundly non-absorptive on another, in relation to potentially the same person, like for
Hmm.
example your mom.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, but isn't that interesting that we use absorptive as the basis of understanding relation, like absorptive or non-absorptive, like versus, I mean, you used this word earlier, but independent versus interdependent
Hmm.
is another basis, of this comparison. And I guess I view it more in that way because that feel that I guess absorptive and non-absorptive, we're putting them at odds, right? Versus independent and interdependent are they don't feel like at odds to me because like in order to be in a relationship to anything, there has to be a self that thing is in relation with. So like I have to be independent in order to be interdependent because if I'm not independent, then that thing or person or whatever can't see me, can't depend on me. so so that's why I guess it's not paradoxical to me.
it's so interesting to hear you just like the exchange of our conversation. If you compare this with triple attachment nines that I've spoken to, it's just like it's pretty amazing. It's like the quality of like our conversation is it's like something arises in me, constellates into an idea, and it's like here's this little like figurine that I've created as a mental construct. I hand it over to you, and you're like, actually, no, I don't see it that way. I see it this other way, you know. And you kind of reshape it into this other thing, and then you hand it to me. Whereas the in triple attachment nine conversations, it's much more like I don't like. I almost want to use the word conversation. It's almost like it's not as much of a tennis match. It's more of like a participatory, collaborative, like kind of I'm we're in each other's worlds kind of thing. And I think
mm,
what's really just at the end of that whole paragraph amazing to me and striking is the difference between a six fix and a five fix because of the rejection versus attachment and the mental center that we were describing before. But
how does that feel
yeah.
for you emotionally when I do that? Because I think I've gotten some feedback from people that it's not great.
Kind of exciting actually. I mean, for me it's
Okay.
well, let's see. For me as a person running this interview, it's like I experience a sense of like this and also being a 3 leading with image, it's like I'm saying something and then you're disagreeing with it and on some subtle level, it's like there's the initial like, "Ah!" like, did he not like that? Um,
Mm,
but, you know, taking a breath, it's like just entering the back and forth, and there's a sense of what, maybe a way to put it is it feels like there's a certain emotional distance that I have to travel to
mm,
accept the exchange, and then participate in the co-discovery that we're doing as this
mm.
conversation goes on. Um, because it's like for me, I experience it almost like an attachment miss or attachment disappointment.
Okay. Huh.
Not
That's
that I'm
interesting.
having
Yeah,
an
I
off
mean
the
that's
rails emotional reaction to it, but that's just
right.
tracking what's going on.
But what hit for me is that you feel like you have to travel the emotional distance to meet me where I'm at. And I mean, in some cases, like that's okay, but like in most conversations, I don't want the other person to feel that way. I
Hmm.
I want it to feel like we're on equal ground and like, because to me, like it does feel like a tennis match. Like
Yeah.
so like the ball that I'm hitting to you, you're just hitting back to me. So we're the same distance. We're just hitting things back and forth, and it's fun. I'm glad you're having fun, but yeah, but yeah, that kind of tracks with what other people have told me too.
Do
Yeah.
you experience for you as a because you're all you're a double attachment type with a you have one rejection fix, two attachment fixes, and do you experience also or in any way in this conversation traveling an emotional distance to meet me, or do you feel more or less self-contained?
No, I don't feel that way. I mean, other than just the interview format, I think it's just I
Mhm.
don't do this every day, so that's the work, I guess. But other than that, I mean, not really. I feel like I'm here and I'm enjoying myself.
Yeah. So I'm just taking a breath and seeing where to go from here.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I think what this is challenging for me is a sense of squaring like how is a five fix playing in your type structure versus a six fix. And um, let me actually, I'll just very, very briefly share like the contours of my theory with you and then see how it
Okay.
lands.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we'll start a new tennis match. So, um, so my sense is that like our object relational theory, the traditional object relations theory as it's posed in the Enneagram is attachment, frustration, and rejection in relation to something abstract called the nurturing function or the protective function or both.
Mm-hmm.
And or Belinda Gore has it as nurturing, protecting, and belonging. Or I've also heard protecting slash guiding in a hyphenated way.
Right.
And then I also heard someone do protecting, nurturing, and guiding as a three part. So it's kind of this a little bit swirl of like, where are we and what is the object? And we're pretty clear about the affect. I think the object needs clarity. And where my theory comes in is basically saying that I think the body center is oriented to the what I'm calling the field of sensation or holding. So like the way that the world is holding me, kind of like when you're a 1 week old infant, you don't actually have senses that are focused enough to be able to distinguish objects in your environment or hold mental maps in your head. You're just basically a body awash in a new sensory surround, and you are wanting to be held like the womb. So I think all three body types have a nostalgia for the womb state, and are
Interesting.
basically the object relational affect is in relation to the way that the world is holding me. So 8 is rejecting it, 1 is frustrated with it, 9 is attached to it. And
Mm.
then in the heart center, you have the same thing with respect to the field of what I'm calling gaze, which is how other people are regarding me, other people's attunement to me, whether or not they're seeing me, and also how I see myself. And so a whole thing around identity. So 3s are attached to gaze, 4s are frustrated with gaze, and 2s are rejecting gaze. And then in the mental center, the same formulation in relation to the field of orientation. So like 6 is attached to exogenous orientation, 7 is frustrated with it, and 5 is rejecting it. So in my head, I've been holding this theory for our conversation and really tracking, in a certain sense, how central to you the rejection of orientation is, and the entire exploration that we just had of what our conversational dynamic is kind of in that space, you know. But I'm also curious about the other two parts of you that are attached to what I would be considering the field of gaze or sensation. So I know that was a sort of brand new theory on the spot, but how
Yeah.
does that land?
Can you say more about sensation and holding? Like, what does that mean? Like, how would you
Yeah.
further explain it? Yeah.
So the body center I think of as a much more rich and textured thing than we have a way even to understand. We generally understand in Western culture. So holding is like basically anything has a sensory impact on me. The couch, also like my presence on this call right now is having a sensory impact on you. You could say that's vis-a-vis the social instinct or just whatever. It's like if someone were to walk into the room right now, that would have a sensory impact on you as well. And if someone were to say, for example, hey, I made a reservation for 8 p.m. tonight, like make sure you dress up or like be on time, and you didn't consent to it, you didn't know that that was going to happen, that also would have a sensory impact on you, you know. And so the other people's demands, other people's energies, other people's presence is forming a kind of sensory holding environment. And uh, the 8 is rejecting it in the sense of like, no, I'm not like let me put it this way. I'm trying to like be concise about this because it's an interview format, but it's not really concise. I'll just give you the rest of it. So my sense is that what object relations is how we construct a false self that is able to cope with misses in our environment. And a sensory miss is like a way that my sensory field is irritating me or overwhelming me or um, violating me in some way. Okay, so like when you're in the womb, you're just being rocked, you're being held, you're sort of one with mom and stuff, and then all of a sudden you're out of the womb, and just even being laid down on a still bed is not the same experience as being rocked in the womb. And so there's a way that your sensory environment is irritating in a way that you've never experienced before. It's just a different sensory surround. And the rage of the body center is like, I didn't choose to be here.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm now bombarded by a sensory experience that I have no control over. And the existential dilemma of the body center is, how do I create boundaries to protect myself from irritating and overwhelming sensations? 8 feels violated by the sensory surround and so rejects it and creates its own holding environment. 1 feels constantly frustrated by the sensory surround, like that shelf is crooked, or like that person is doing something and it's having an effect on me and I just can't numb myself to it. And so
Yeah.
I have to go fix it. And then the 9 is attached in the kind of like hope that the world will hold me like the womb did, but unpleasant sensations, of course, get in. And so I numb myself as a way to sort of stay open to the environment while not being overly affected by irritating sensations. That's the that's the that's the body sensor
Yeah.
of that theory.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm following. Yeah. It's interesting. Um, during one of my, um, I sometimes sit with ayahuasca.
Mhm.
During one of my sits, one very memorable experience I had was, um, I was in the room and I like my body just, and I was sitting up and my body just did this, like an opening, like you're saying,
Mhm.
and like, and I, and then my, what I, and then I start to see like it was like different TV screens kind of showing up, um, and it kept multiplying, like different TV screens, each TV screen like showing like an experience of something going on, and I could feel all these experiences, like someone, um, yeah, getting attacked or someone having a good time, like all these different things that were in the room, and then it kept multiplying and multiplying, and then it got too much, and then my body like did this,
Kind of
mhm,
contracted in.
right, contracted it and like
Yeah.
protect, and then it did it, and then after a while I was like, and then it did this again, and it repeated like an infinite number of times. It's how that feels in that space, like an infinite number of
Mhm.
times, and I was like living this over and over again of like opening and closing and opening and closing and opening and closing, and the closing felt so good, like like closing felt so good, and it felt so lonely.
Mm.
And so I was like, oh my God, like, is there no other state? Like, is it just either open or close?
Mhm.
And then someone, um, one of the facilitators, like, came over and like started brushing me with an owl feather, like,
Mm.
just brushing me, my face, and like everywhere, and like, and then I could, they were kind of sharing this owl medicine with me, just
Mhm.
brushing me, and I just started melting. I started just melting into the music and the feather, and like I became an owl, and then I started like doing that thing that owls do of like using their beaks to like get into their
Preen
feathers,
themselves.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What is it called?
Preening.
Preening. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's oh yeah, preening. And then I started doing this motion. I started like
Mm.
um, brushing myself, and I was like, oh, this is a new state to be in. Not this or this, but brushing, preening, like you're saying, preening,
Mm.
so that I can be open to the world, but I can also preen myself and like shed, things that are not me. And I don't have to be closed off from the world, rejecting the world or frustrated with the world, right? I don't have to do that and be lonely, you know?
Mm. Mhm.
And so that's a long answer to your theory of like the holding space and like an attachment to the sensation of holding space,
Mhm.
and like because you're saying it's like having the hope that the world will hold me. um I, yeah, I guess that's what being open is, right? Is having the hope that I can exist in the world.
Yes.
um,
Yeah, without being overwhelmed or irritated or
yeah. I can
yeah.
exist in right relation to the world,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and not just react and respond to that by doing this, just preening. And so, yeah, I think that's on to something. Sensation and holding. Yeah, I can like me preening is me holding myself.
Exactly.
Me
Yeah.
taking care of
Yeah.
myself and me shedding things that aren't me, but I'm not closing myself off. Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing and yeah, really beautiful. I'm it let's see. It really strikes me that you had only two options, right, prior to
Yeah.
discovering this. Is like the closed, lonely but safe position
Yeah.
and the
Mhm.
open participating in the world, but um just all of your raw whatever interior is exposed to the world.
Yeah.
And
Overwhelming. Yeah.
so this idea of preening represents a certain way that you take a responsibility over washing yourself as you move through the world of whatever impurities you've kind of absorbed or that stick onto you. And it's just in watching your gestures there, it's like the process of that was, I mean, it feels almost like balletic or um, like I could see how it feels good. I could just see how it was like on a
Yeah.
sensory level, just yummy, like for you to
Yeah.
just do
Yummy.
that, um, I just did it to myself. It feels really nice. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like that kind of, and so you could say in a certain sense, I mean, that is psychedelics are amazing because, and you don't have to know the Enneagram to go on any of these Enneagrammic journeys, but it's just amazing how like that's a 9 journey. It's like discovering your to use your word, the way you exist in the world is this either this open or closed state, and then to discover an option where you can actually engage and participate, and that is actually the virtue of the 9, or sometimes it's called engagement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah. So has that stayed with you, and what's it like to
Yeah.
live from that
Totally.
space, and what's
I mean, yeah, it stayed with me. I try to practice it, but right, it's a daily practice, and
Mhm.
and part of it is, I think the word responsibility is great, like taking responsibility for doing that, for cleaning myself, for
Yeah,
preening myself, um, because you know I can go around the world and close off like this and be safe, um, but but then I'm not affected by things, and I'm not living, I'm not experiencing life in a way that is meaningful, and you know, um, yeah, and being open open allows for like being affected, allows for experiencing the whole range of emotion from like terror and sadness and grief all the way to like joy and like wonder and the sublime.
mm,
um but how it's kind of played out in practice is kind of developing strategies like I was talking about earlier of like trying to notice when I dissociate. That's one,
yeah,
right? And like
uh-huh.
tracing back to, oh, what are the particular triggers for that dissociation? And then being responsible for noticing when that trigger arises and then engaging with it. Okay, either it was the other person or the environment, or like with myself. Like, okay, like hold yourself, like you can you can allow yourself to be anxious and preen, you know,
Mm,
um, or on the other spectrum, right, that's like dissociation. On the other spectrum of like exploding, um, you know, is a similar strategy of like noticing when that energy comes up and it feels really good, um, and noticing the lead up to the point of explosion and like what sets it off, and like being okay, like what you're feeling now is repressed energy. You can use that energy, but you don't have to let it out. And this is actually from Thich Nhat Hanh. Um, he said like, or someone asked him like, oh, like, and this is very interesting. I think Thich Nhat Hanh is a 9. I mean,
I think
someone
so
asked
too.
him like,
Yeah.
yeah, what do you do with all this anger? Like, what do you do? Like, I just want to like let it all out and like express myself. And he's like, why do you feel the need to do that? Like, why do you feel the need to let it all out? He's like, you don't have to waste it. Like, you can think of anger as like mud. Like mud sometimes is like, and I'm paraphrasing here, right? Mud is something like sticky and grimy and stuff like that. But like without mud, like lotus flowers can't grow. So like, take care of your mud.
Hmm.
And that to me is like being responsible for preening like the mud in me and like utilizing it to grow lotus flowers, and sometimes it is maybe expressing it, right? But like, it's not either or. It's not either dissociating or like expressing. It's not like either repressing or exploding, right? There's always a third option of being responsible for yourself to preen and, to preen the mud to grow lotus flowers, So, yeah.
I don't want to I think this language is really wonderful, and I don't want to take it into too literal a space from this poetic metaphoric space, but what is mud and what is the lotus flower, and how do you like in your life?
You mean like literal examples, I guess is what you're asking.
Sure, if you have them.
Yeah, I mean, the mud is like, I guess in that example is like feelings of anger, right? And rage, and like turning it into energy, so that I turn it into passion, like expressing passion so that I can make something beautiful in the world. Like feeling a boundary being violated and expressing that it's violated is a form of passion instead of like, because in that sense I am taking responsibility of taking care of myself, um, instead of letting things stick to me. Yeah, I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought there. Yeah.
Do you experience the lotus flower in your work or in your relationships or in quiet moments by yourself? Something else?
Yeah, I guess when I'm creating something, right, be it at work or sometimes I do charcoal art. When I'm creating something, I feel like those are like the most explicit forms of lotus flowers because there's like a tangible manifestation of something that I've created from like this mud that I've been cultivating.
It does
Yeah.
it does strike me that it might not actually be like this concrete, like da 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 da. Here's my present. Here's my lotus flower world. It's kind of
Yeah.
like
No.
it feels like the way that you're using that term is um a kind of inner blossoming that is um the f- the f- the feeling of being willing to open as you engage in the process of continually preening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. 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 So more of like an internal blossoming.
Yeah.
So like turning that mud into beautiful energy. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I feel like that's a pretty lovely place to stop.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I
I
don't know how long do these usually go, or like I know because
Anywhere
sometimes you.
between an hour and like an hour and a half or so, usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to
No,
get
I
at?
mean I think that felt really good. I
Yeah.
felt really energetic and yeah. How did it feel from your point of view? Like having done these a lot.
Yeah, really, really good actually. Yeah, I'm struck by. I loved our meta conversational moment, and then bringing in this psychedelic thing is like pretty incredible. I'm a big psychedelic believer, and have had a
Yeah.
number of experiences myself that have been incredibly powerful as well. So I'm really glad that you brought it there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
I want to ask one other thing
Okay.
about attachment to disconnect, just because I don't know that everyone will have heard what that actually is, and so maybe just
Yeah.
can you explain what it is and what it was that made you think of it and how it's revealed stuff about you and um, kind of where you're at working with it yourself?
Yeah. I don't remember particularly what what inspired that or
Mhm.
triggered that, because it was some post on Facebook, I guess, that I responded to.
Yeah,
But um, but basically, right, it's because the core pattern of attachment is adaptation, or I'm adapting to something. If I'm not adapting, then then my ego, that's ego death, right? Or like my ego doesn't know what to do, so like
yeah,
explodes. So so in order to create, or in order to keep that going, we need to create circumstances where we can adapt. So if we're familiar or comfortable, that's not adapting anymore. So we have to create circumstances to pull ourselves away so that the environment changes. Oh, now that I can adapt again. So it keeps that adaptation behavior going.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And that's excellent. And it's partly what was so revelatory about the idea was that it was, in a certain sense, clear how frustration and rejection were um, maybe you could say constantly creating the conditions in which their object relation was at play.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
kind of like attachment, well, if you're attachment sort of prior to your revelation felt like the good object relation. Like that's what you should be wanting to do, right? It's like, yeah, great,
Yeah.
attach to people and then everyone's happy. But that's not actually what attachment is referring to from an object relations point of view. It's like attachment is the way that we not only attempt to create some form of connection, but also participate in the creation of the conditions in which we're continually reaching for that connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Attachment. That's a terrible word. I hate that word.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because of the Enneagram context. Because it's like it's meaningless. There's no meaning to it.
I know, yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
Courtney also says, I mean, that word had no juice for her when she originally heard it. Kind of it's true for me
Yeah.
too. I wonder if there's do you have a better
Yeah.
one?
No. I mean, like disconnect, right? But like
Yeah.
because in my comment I was like, oh, frustration types are attached to frustration. They're attached to creating circumstances where they're frustrated,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Attached to create rejection types are attached to creating circumstances where they can reject, or and where they continually feel rejected.
Yes.
Um, whereas attachment types are attached to disconnect, where they can, well, maybe adaptation. I don't know, where they
Uh-huh. Yep.
continually
Mm.
create circumstances to adapt. So maybe adaptation, but that doesn't ring, you know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, um, are you still like percolating on Enneagram stuff and I imagine that you are in your
Yeah,
private
yeah.
head chamber there.
I'm percolating. I'm percolating on it. I'm percolating on it, and I'm percolating on it more in the world these days in terms of like, so um I guess we didn't have time to get into this, or I don't know. This past year I've been getting into fitness
Okay.
as a way to like get into my body, and
Okay.
it has
Yeah.
done like amazing things for like my mental capacity and my emotional openness. It's interesting to see that relationship of like engaging with my body and like learning how to be in my body more, um,
Hmm.
and how that translates over to the other centers.
Sure.
Um, and so I've been trying to live in like the Enneagram instead of theorizing it, which is, it's not typical of me. Like I've always just been a very cerebral person in general.
Hmm.
And so getting into fitness and doing difficult things with my body, pushing myself to be able to handle discomfort in the physical realm has translated to being able to handle discomfort emotionally.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you so much for this. This is
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me on here. This is great. Great to talk to you too.
You got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
until next time.
Thanks, Josh.